What is going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller from Hook'emHeadlines.com. I wanted to come back at y'all today with a new video series. I want to break down some of the top NFL draft prospects coming out of the Texas football program in the 2023 class, just to provide the generic structure of what these videos will look like. Similar to the transfer or recruit breakdowns that we do on the channel. We'll talk about a little bit about the backstory of each player, what they were, how they were recruited, their path at Texas, kind of what they bring to the table, their production, things like that, during the time that because I've covered, I believe, every single one of these guys, unless they were transfers, from beginning to end in their career at Texas. So I kind of bring that perspective to the table. And like I said, there's going to be about 7 or 8 guys that we're going to cover throughout this series. Shane and Tart from the site will be occasionally joining me as well, just to provide some additional insight and perspective on each of these different players. But today I wanted to start with DeMarvion Overshown, one of the top defensive prospects for the 2023 NFL draft coming out of Texas. Go ahead and start with his recruitment. He was a 4 or 5 star, depending on the recruiting service that you looked at. Safety was at the time about 6'3", 195 pounds, coming out of high school. He was one of the highest rated signees in the Longhorns 2018 recruiting class. He didn't, when he arrived on campus, there was obviously a lot of excitement surrounding his game. He one of the highest upside players in the 2018 class, one of the most physically gifted as well. But a lot of the traits that he possessed were a better fit ultimately at the linebacker position than they were at defensive back or just at safety. Just the explosiveness, ranginess, sideline to sideline speed that he brings. And I'll kind of use this point to jump into his path at Texas and how, him becoming a 3-year starting linebacker kind of came to be. So his first year as a full-time starter was really in 2020. The prior year, 2019, was the first year where he got any sort of consistent reps. He played in 5 games, but he was still kind of, again, in that hybridized safety linebacker role. He hadn't officially been converted to a full-time linebacker at that point. Still though, 2019, he flashed plenty, finished up because he only played in I think it was 5 or 6 games, close to 20 combined tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, a pick, 3 pass breakups, and a forced fumble. So he was already kind of showing some of those playmaker traits that we would get to know him a lot more for in 2020. 2020 was the first year where he was converted to be a full-time linebacker. At the time, you could tell that there were certain instinctual qualities that still needed to settle in for him. The pace at which you have to diagnose plays and, read the ball carrier pre-snap or off the line of scrimmage, post-snap, that he hadn't really settled in for him yet. But he was showing a lot as like I said, just a playmaking linebacker at the time. In 2020, 8 tackles for a loss, 60 combined tackles, handful of quarterback pressures, 2 picks and 7 pass breakups, also a couple of forced fumbles. He was a guy that just kind of brought unlimited energy, was just shot out of a cannon on a lot of plays in run defense or just chasing down the ball carrier from the backside. He was someone that really flashed a lot during that season, but that was the last year that he was playing under Tom Herman, and at the time he was already playing under his second defensive coordinator at Texas. So then you fast forward to the 2021 season. Tom Herman's gone as head coach. Steve Sarkisian comes in, brings with him the former Washington co-defensive coordinator Pete Kwiatkowski, who had some difficulties in his first year as Texas defensive coordinator. Just guys that were kind of playing out of role, a lot of guys that were still adapting to the new defense. Texas staff was still largely getting their guys in the mix. The 2021 defense was filled with a lot of transfers, a lot of guys that were just, I don't want to say like low effort or not fully bought in is probably the best way to put that. And so Overshown kind of suffered a little bit for that. Also, like he I don't believe he got a full off season of workouts in. Some combination of, I believe it was a combination of different injury issues and things like that. But 2021 was an up and down season for him, showing a little bit more stability in terms of making more defensive stops, being able to generate a little bit more pressure on the passer because he was used in more pass rush situations during the 2021 season. He wasn't dropping into pass coverage near as much as he was in 2020. Again, it's kind of shift in philosophy between it was Chris Ash at the time in 2020, and then PK last year, and then on. But there were a lot of concerns that jumped out at me, or just I think anyone that was breaking down Overshown's game during the 2021 campaign. He was still missing reads, missing some tackles. Run defense, run stopping ability was still a major question mark at the time. He was not very good in run defense during the 2021 season. One of the lowest graded linebackers in that phase of defense. 2022 ended up being a lot more positive for Overshown. I believe it was his most complete season as a linebacker at Texas. He really started to blossom more as a run defender. He's always been pretty consistent in pass coverage. He graded in the middle of the pack all 3 years as a full-time starting linebacker in pass coverage. But he did up his number of pass breakups from 2 to 5, so there was marked improvement there. But it was his first season with double-digit tackles for loss. He finished up with 10, also had 4 sacks and was one of the team leaders in quarterback pressures. Also had a career-high 96 combined tackles. There were a lot of phases of his game that he just looked more instinctual, looked more confident. He was one part of a Texas linebacker duo that also included Jalen Ford, who was a third-team All-American during the 2022 campaign. That I think was one of the best linebacker duos in the Big 12. And Overshown kind of holding his own as this, and at this point, hybridized like outside linebacker, edge rusher on certain downs, and then otherwise just an inside linebacker. He really was able to be like one of the more versatile pieces that PK was able to maneuver around. Again, Texas was a lot more improved in terms of the pass rush during the 2022 campaign than the year prior. Overshown just being able to generate so much pressure on the passer when he had an advantageous matchup off the edge. He pretty much always a stand-up edge rusher if that's the usage he had at the time. But he's quick. He's quick off the edge, got a ton of burst, and like I said, that versatility was something that really showed during the 2022 season. It was his most, it was his most consistent year. He was really a force to be reckoned with, and made a lot of plays all over the place. I mentioned earlier that he was really improved as a run defender. I think that was probably his biggest stride in like this past season. He was, I believe, one of the 5 highest rated linebackers in run defense among eligible linebackers in the Big 12. He also ranked in the top 5 in run stop percentage. And then he cut his missed tackle rate in half almost year over year in run defense. So very marked improvement in run defense in multiple ways. Like I said, looking more instinctual, picking up on plays quicker. So a lot of pluses in those regards. And he really finished up at Texas with very much on a high note, an all Big 12 linebacker on one of the most improved defensive units in the Big 12, if not the entire Power 5. Like I said, still kind of holding his own in pass coverage and really improving in terms of both his usage, which is on the coaching staff, but really improving in terms of his usage and his production as a pass rusher and a run stopper. So a lot more formidable. But anyway, let's kind of use this transition point to move into some of his strengths. So, I've mentioned it over and over again in this video so far. He really is a physical freak. He is, I think, one of the highest upside linebackers in this draft class. Depending on who you look at, he's often projected anywhere between like the 7th or 8th best linebacker to like the 25th. It's just a lot of his projection has to do with upside. and versatility. And a lot of that's kind of hard to quantify. And there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the linebacker position. I believe that's one of the more like uncertain positions just in terms of draft board and pecking order of any in this class. But he, like I said, he's someone that finally had a full off season to get in the system, bulk up some, and really just get an understanding of what his role was under PK's direction along this defensive front, and it really paid dividends. Like I said, in multiple regards, pass rushing and run defense being the main two. But I guess I'll start here with his pass rushing ability and some of the upside that he brings in that regard. So there's a number of ways that you can use him. You can do some kind of just delayed pressure from the outside, or you can just kind of shoot him out of a cannon from the outside as well, with the asterisk that he's got to have an advantageous matchup, that there's got to be a gap he can hit somewhere. Maybe he's matched up with like a running back or a tight end. Because if he's going up against like an offensive tackle, just physically doesn't weigh enough. Frame isn't big enough. But you can also use him on different stunts along the inside. Delayed blitzes up the middle. He really maneuvers well. I mean, obviously he's a lot more agile than a lot of the blockers that would be matched up against him. And so there's really just a number of ways that you can move him around and use him. I think I've mentioned it already in this video. It's more of a chess piece that can play a number of different roles along the defensive front. He, again, was improving year over year in terms of the just quantity of quarterback pressures that he was getting for Texas, and the win rate as well as a pass rusher. But in terms of just physical traits for his pass rushing ability, I think the two things that are going to stick out the most are just his chase down speed, his agility off the edge, because even if you want to compare him to some of the more agile inside linebackers in the NFL, the dude's just an absolute physical freak. He's also got really long arms. Kind of once he zones in on you at this point, you're probably not getting away, because he's faster than most of the definitely faster than most of the quarterbacks he would face, but he's also faster than a lot of the running backs he's faced as well. I believe he runs around a 4.5 40, at least at last measurement time that I could find. In terms of his run stopping ability, I think that has it's definitely turned into more of a strength than it was, say, even 2 years ago or during the 2021 season. He, again, showed a lot more instinctual qualities on film this past season, covering his gaps a lot better. Really kind of spearheading some gang tackling, just getting hats to the football, being the guy that could kind of blow up a lot of those plays in the backfield or start stacking up guys. And that, I think, just, again, comes down to play diagnosis and instincts once the, post-snap off the line of scrimmage. And so that's something that's turning into more of a strength, but I think that's also still a little bit of a work in progress. But it's really just his insane athleticism, sideline to sideline speed that will make him so rangy and such a matchup advantage when you're talking about run stopping ability. And that's going to, like I said, that's going to be his main plus in that regard. But coverage is going to be one of the biggest pluses as well for him. Being able to have a guy that was a safety coming out of high school that still has that speed, that ranginess, and some sort of proven reliability in production and pass coverage from the linebacker position is going to be, I think, more of a benefit than a drawback in terms of scouting him. He's going to be moved around a lot in the NFL, but against tight ends, maybe running backs out of the backfield, and just covering the flats. He's proficient in those areas, and I think will continue to be. He's got enough speed. He's a smart enough player in pass coverage. Got enough experience in that regard where I'm confident enough to say that he can hold his own. In kind of limited coverage situations. The last thing that I really wanted to mention, just in terms of his strengths, is just going to be his versatility. I've mentioned this multiple times over, but defensive chess piece is a word that I'll say over and over and over again. because if he really does start touching that upside that he has, and that, I think the upside that he started to show on a more consistent basis in his final season at Texas, that um, he's going to probably end up being a steal if he ends up going as a day 2 or day 3 pick in this draft. There's not much that he's really bad at, and this type of insanely athletic, versatile chess piece on defense is becoming more of a common thing in the NFL. That teams are looking for that, and so that's what's going to make Overshown such a valuable commodity in this class. You transition here to talk about some of the questionable areas in his game, and I also want to take some time to like kind of dispel some myths that I've seen from some different scouting reports that I've read on him. I see a lot that is mentioning or skills and run defense that are a major negative, and I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. That might have been some old info, some old data from scouting reports, because it was more of a question mark for him in his first 2 seasons as a starting linebacker, not so much in 2022. Again, having a full season or having a full off season in this system, he really figured out his role where he can thrive in run stopping, and he proved to be one of the best Big 12 or run stopping linebackers in the Big 12 in 2022. Starting to put it all together in that regard. So while I do think there's still certain areas in run defense, play diagnosis, I do still think that, if there's any pre-snap deception from opposing offenses, or is still in situations, maybe where he's being asked to do a lot at the line of scrimmage in terms of maybe, posing some confusing looks and different schemes along the defensive front. If, he's kind of just kind of like a false or like a blitzing decoy or something like that, and then he's being asked to cover a different gap and run defense, whatever that be, some different stunts up front. I think going through the multiple reads there and making those in-play adjustments, just that feel for the game is still going to be a work in progress. But again, for the most part, he was much better covering his gaps, much better at actually wrapping up when he is able to find the ball and get his hands on the ball carrier. A lot less of an issue in terms of missed tackles. So again, run defense, I don't think it's a major weakness for him anymore. I will say size is going to be a factor here, because a lot of the situations that teams are going to want to use him in, whether that be pass rushing, especially if it's coming up the inside, or if he's being asked to cover a more technical route runner, if he gets carried to the outside, kind of gets carried outside of the numbers, that could be an issue in pass coverage. But I think that's more of a generic linebacker quality where, you're usually going to get a mismatch if you can manage to get a wide out on a linebacker. So I don't think any of these things that I'm mentioning in this part are specific to Overshown. But I do think I do think his smaller frame could be an issue if he's going up against bigger blockers. Slipping those blocks at 225 pounds is a tall task, and I think just he's going to be a little bit overmatched physically in that regard. And then I would really say that kind of plays into my last point here, and I still think he needs to I think he still needs to put on a little bit more size, also add some more moves to his arsenal as a pass rusher, and just being able to improve his ability to shed blocks when he's kind of playing into like an A or a B gap up against some bigger linemen, or even against a bigger tight end, a bigger blocking tight end. Again, it was fairly recent that he was being used more as a pass rusher, and while the traits he brings to the table and his explosiveness allows him to thrive in a few different looks and schemes as a pass rusher, I still think in terms of like just being able to shed blocks and have that upper body strength that you need to compete in some of those one-on-one situations in the trenches, those areas will need to be improved as well. But anyway, I guess the last part here, talking about his long-term trajectory and where I think he ultimately fits in the NFL. Again, he kind of really started to fit into this role as a hybrid inside linebacker. But there's just so many different ways that you can utilize him. Hybridized safety, I don't know if I've seen that mentioned by a few scouting reports as a potential fit, but I still think kind of this hybridized inside linebacker that he's turned into in the last few years at Texas will be his long-term projection in the NFL. Also, I think it's pretty good value if you could find him late day 2 or early day 3. Third or fourth round pick seems to be about the right spot for him. We'll see, though. We still got the combine, still got pro day, things like that can dramatically shake up draft stock, because he's the type of guy that can really go out and just have an insane combine, an insane pro day, and just like really shoot up draft boards, because that's the type of like physical tools that he brings to the table. So that's something I'll be looking out for. But yeah, anyway, that's pretty much it for the first video for this series for some of the Texas Texas player NFL draft scouting reports for the 2023 class. So for Andrew Miller at Hook'emHeadlines.com, that's pretty much it. Hook 'em.